Call to order the budget workshop for March 14th, 2022. Would you please join me in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next, we have roll call. We have Dr. Lucero and myself here at the district office. We have Ms. Weiser, Ms. Shumway, and Ms. Young online. So we do have a quorum, all five. And that takes us to item 4, discussion of projected FY23 M&O and capital expenditure budget.
Mr. President, members of the board, as I work through this, I think, like always, if we have questions, feel free to stop me, ask those questions, break into discussion, whatever you need. So without that, I'm going to get going. You guys can hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Okay. Okay, so as you know from how often we speak about budget year in and year out, the goal is to always retain that financial flexibility while also, reaching for our strategic activities and paying for them and trying to push the district forward. And so we have retained much of our financial flexibility through the pandemic. Much of that is because of ESSER funds, even though ESSER funds brought in new money to the district and allowed us to move into new priorities and new objectives. It also supplemented some of the money we lost via the drop in enrollment, as well as money we spent when people were sent home and things like that. So it allowed us to keep business as usual, but in that same moment, we definitely did some deficit spending. So though we have that financial flexibility, Prop 208 was introduced at the beginning of this year. It did not bring any new revenue to our district. As of this weekend, Prop 208 was ruled unconstitutional by, I think, an Arizona judge. And so from my perspective, and I think the district's perspective, Prop 208 is probably dead now. So, but what Prop 208 did, and the fight between that, is it brought what's known as the aggregate expenditure limit into focus. And we've talked a lot about that constitutional limit that's on districts. They're known as spending caps. And so we were in danger of exceeding that as a state this year. And the legislature recently voted to override that, but it did not set protections in place for next year. And so you can look at the Prop 208 going away now. Logically, you could consider the idea that maybe this means they will find ways to protect 301, essentially pull it out of that aggregate expenditure calculation, but they haven't done so yet, and it's all moved to next year. You could also look at this as a pessimist and say, well, Prop 208, a voter-approved initiative, has now been ruled unconstitutional. They could potentially go after 301 as being unconstitutional as well, especially if they don't introduce any protections. So all of that, what I'm trying to say is we're still going into a year where we're going to have some uncertainty. We shouldn't have to wait for March, as I believe this fight will be taken to voters in November. At least that was the last we had heard about it, but that was prior to Prop 208, the ruling that was issued on Prop 208 this weekend. So I'm going to move on for that, but is there any questions? Okay. So compounding factors, FY21 enrollment was down 500 students when compared to FY20. Our current year, we are back up to those pre-FY21 numbers. So we're back up to around 6,500 plus. Despite ESSER, there was substantial deficit spending during FY21 within M&O and capital. And I think we put a huge onus as a district and a board on maintaining our strategic plan and maintaining standard practices and really trying to keep any brunt of the pandemic or AEL, any of these things away from the classroom and our teachers and people at our schools. So our expectation and enrollment would return has been confirmed, and we would expect revenue to now be more in line with our spending. Again, AEL could undermine that entire thing.
Aaron, I have a question on when you look at the substantial deficit spending, what would be an example of an item that caused a lot of that to occur this past year?
It would really be like our raises in that year, right? So we lost revenue in the year, but going into the year, we still provided the raises. We tried to hit minimum wage before minimum wage went into effect, and we were able to give raises to our teachers. But then when the minimum wage actually hit in January, it was 50 cents higher than what we projected. Even we had done 30 cents at the beginning of the year. It ended up being an 80 cents increase. So that's a mid-year increase in budget and spending that we're not necessarily getting the revenue for, right? So revenue goes down, students go down, so the revenue goes down, but we kept our spending at pre-21 levels. So I guess that's the best way for me to explain it is, though less money came in, our expenditures were at or exceeded the prior year. And raises always have or I shouldn't even say raises, just compensation in general have the biggest impact on our budget.
Thank you.
Okay. So here I just kind of break out the years, 19, 20, 21, and then 22 through December, just to give you an idea and a visual representation of the ebb and flow of our revenue versus our expenses. In that FY19 year, there is a mistake that I had made during the time. So it's a real calculation that is in our accounting system, but I was putting real property taxes where personal property taxes should have been. So you'll see in 20 and 21 and 22, those numbers flip as that's been corrected since, but I didn't want to portray it as if it had been corrected back then. So really this is to give you an idea of that. And something about cash flow, because this is really what this represents is your cash flow at any given moment, is that the state holds back a substantial amount of money every year that they push out to July, and recently they've pushed it out even to August. And so in our current year, we can expect the state to withhold $4.5 million from us throughout the year, and then have those show up in July and August. And so cash flow is important in the fact that you're going to be short the revenue you're expecting at the end of the year, and you sometimes need a bridge to get to where the state actually makes its payments. We've kept our cash reserves up and in a good place so that we can stay in those spots, but with deficit spending, reserves get reduced, and you start talking about cash flow issues again. And so the goal of finance would be to work really hard to build those back up so that we can avoid taking out a line of credit or anything like that in order to just maintain cash flow. Budget capacity is always a different thing. Our district never overspends its budget capacity, but cash flow is an issue statewide, including for us. So before I move from here, do we have any questions?
Yeah, Aaron, it's Gretchen. Can you explain or try to explain why that is, why the state withholds a certain percent of a budget until that late in the year or even into the next fiscal year?
The way I understand it, it's a way for them to manage their own cash flow. So the state as often manages its budget issues and its cash flow issues off of the entities that it funds.
Thank you.
So you can see with the combined influx in revenue from the state, the 20% and 20, restoration of capital, and the commitment to spend a portion of our reserves, we were well situated in FY20 before COVID. I just want to point out how good of a track we were on until that hit. And I'm confident that we can all get back to that. It's we saw it go away in a way. So We maintained our plans as I've discussed in FY21, despite the drop in enrollment. Important to note, I just went through this, the millions in funding that is withheld. And then again, I'll say in 22, we're starting to recover and build back some of that lost revenue and enrollment. And again, I'll keep saying it, the AEL issue is that shadow that looms over the entire state.
And Aaron, I would also just remind everyone that when our enrollment dropped, not only did we retain every teacher, we didn't RIF or reduce any positions, we actually added some to maintain that low classroom average. And you'll talk a little bit later about right sizing, but we're still maintaining that lower than budgeted ratio. So that doesn't that also have something to do with the deficit spending?
Absolutely, right? You lose the revenue, but you maintained your status quo, or even actually made it a little better than previous years, right? We lowered those ratios. Okay. Okay, so here's the projected M&O and capital budgets. Looking at 51 million, this is very conservative with about 540,000 reserved for annual carryover. You'll know that's 460,000 short of where I would like it to be. And I would hope that over time we were able to build that up. And then in capital, we would expect 9 million. 4 million of it would make up our cash reserves, which sit right now at about 2.6. So that's trying to get 1.4 back into there during the year, and 5 million for spending. We expect between 6,500 and 7,500 students, or ADM. And then other funds briefly, just because there is a lot of spending and a lot of revenue coming in from other places. We'll continue spending ESSER funds to supplement the COVID recovery. We are still working through the Palo Christi potential. We're on the verge of sending people out for an assessment. We've already discussed with companies so far. They're looking at our plans. And so we're working toward that just to assess it. And then food service revenue is way up. And I'll have to bring that to you again next week at our board meeting. But essentially, we have more money than we are legally allowed to have in the food service account. So we are spending as fast as we get it. And so we expect 750,000 in spending by the end of this year, all in cafeteria upgrades, cafeteria and kitchen related upgrades, all paid for out of the food service account, which is driven by student participation. And then also that teacher compensation fund that allows us to tack on an additional 1% to teacher salaries, that will continue being in effect as well. Any questions here?
Aaron, on that 5 million for spending next year, do you have some examples of some of the big ticket items that you normally set aside for?
Yeah, would you want me to fast forward to that?
Oh, no, we can wait until we get there.
Some of those we have some textbooks that we need next year, and we'll talk more when we get there, but we have textbook needs for next year. And we have we continue to have facility needs. And so where you see us go up kind of about $1.25 million versus current year spending, it would be related to textbooks, and infrastructure would be the biggest increases that I put in there. Related roofs, any sort of
Tipton's roof.
parking lots, like the whole gamut. I'm trying to really gear up with the new company and I'm sorry. We're trying to really gear up with the new company on a 5-year plan that we can execute. And so I'm really trying to prepare our money for that situation. That would be an example of that.
Gotcha. Has there been any discussions over our current situation with fuel and rising costs and our transportation requirements?
I have put, that's not in capital, but I did bump. I know I'm going to have to bump diesel costs. We are under contract, but their contract, and I'd have to get back into it, doesn't like guarantee us a rate below the current rate of diesel or gasoline. And so I do think that's going to be an issue for us, but I have built in some funds and we'll continue monitoring that situation.
Great.
Okay, so this is our compensation recommendation. We recommend not providing percentage raises to employees in FY23. Despite this recommendation, we expect to still provide raises in a few areas. The teacher compensation fund, which I already mentioned, the 1.25%, it was paid as a stipend for current year. All teachers who are returning next year, that'll be embedded into their salaries. New teachers who come on with us next year, that would start as a stipend for them. And then when they return, it would turn into part of their salary. We will continue to honor lane changes. Those are education-based increases for certified staff, and tier increases, which are time-based increases for our certified staff. Those will remain in effect as they have for over a decade. We expect minimum wage on January 1st, 2023. I'm very concerned that this is going to be a big one because part of their calculations for minimum wage are related to the cost of living in Arizona. And we are facing, like the rest of the nation, a substantial increase in the cost of living. And so I do worry what that minimum wage will be. Another part, will go another year without passing benefit costs on to employees. I know that's not necessarily a raise, but it is a raise in expenses on the district side, and it avoids us creating a reduction in their compensation. And also we'll gear up for a COVID retention stipend at the end of the year. We expect that to be at 500 at a minimum. And so at our current look, that those are the pieces that would still be in place for employee compensation next year. It's the 1%, 2%, 3% that we're recommending we do not offer in next given year. Any questions? Okay.
I guess so. What it says is so for classified workers, whatever minimum wage increases are applied. And for teachers, teacher compensation fund. For administrators, there really isn't anything next year.
No. But
Okay.
But remember, when we say minimum wage, we apply minimum wage equally across all classified employee positions. So those slotted well above minimum wage would still get the increase in order for us to maintain that separation. And if you do remember, we just did that in January for them as well.
Right.
But you're right. Other than that, we're recommending to stay flat in the compensation arena.
Good. Thank you.
Benefits. This is the best year KUSD has had with benefits since I've been with the district. We've had good years before, but they were related to the old insurance company essentially trying to buy our business, right? Offering us a 0% increase despite us having a loss ratio that approached 100%. So basically what we know from this in this current year is that we switched it over to UMR. We implemented the clinical nurse advocates that talk directly to employees and help them make decisions. And we've continued to up the level of education and offerings from Kairos. But because of that, we saw a substantial change at KUSD in the way we were using our benefits. And so the pool as a whole had a great year, but KUSD was not outside of that. It had a great year as well. And it's a clear improvement from the prior year. And so that's really exciting because I do not think I've seen us improve like that before. And so here's some of a look at that, right? And so on this left side is our current year. On this right side is the previous year. Remember, it's the same measurement period so that you could compare apples to apples. And here you see emergency room, hospitals, right? We almost sliced that in half. And a lot of time with emergency rooms, people could have gotten the same care at urgent care or something like that, or even calling in. And so having us cut that in half, having our employees cut that in half, because if you look down at urgent care, it's up. It's 5 times higher, much lower number. And emergency room is cut in half. That's substantial improvement for KUSD. And then all things considered, down here at the bottom, you can see that per member, we've cut off $60, right? Then it's down to 1.86 versus the 2.35 last year. And this is a chart of like our big spenders. This isn't insurance as a whole. This is the big spenders in insurance. And we did this last year so you could kind of see what was causing our rate increases. Any questions about this? I'm going to show you a drugs tab as well. Okay. I know, sorry, I know less about the drugs and the need to, like, where I understand clearly that sometimes the emergency room is your worst bet as a person and for the insurance company and for the rest of our employees. I don't understand the drugs in the same way, but I can see that we are down 25% in our pharmaceuticals. And some of that's related to pushing toward employees toward generic, pushing them toward, even though they abandoned the mail order plans that started the year, a lot of people still jumped on the mail order, which reduces this level, reduces what it looks like here, the more people who are using the mail order plan and getting the generic drugs. Just wanted to show that briefly since we do pay so much for it. Okay, here is a position compensation breakout for next year. I just wanted you to see positions. Not all of these are filled, right? These are positions in the district and what they'll be budgeted for next year within M&O, as well as what they're budgeted for outside in our federal grants and whatnot. So you can get an idea on both sides what we're spending in basically any area of our district. And if you want to look at that, or if you have any questions for that, I'm happy to answer. Okay. And we can go back if anybody has questions. Here's a budget bird's eye. We were talking about the capital. So here's M&O up top with our conservative 51 million. You see that 78% will all be salaries and benefits. You see that our facilities is relatively expensive. Our district budgets only make up 4%. Those are your SPED, your HR, finance. And that's really about it. That's the summary of it. You can see stipends do make up 2% of everything. The site budgets here, these are discretionary. Those don't include compensation. That's the amount of money that's allocated to sites for their spending throughout the year. Down here, we have our capital budget early projection, right? So we have our facilities, construction, equipment, major renovations have got that up at 1.1 in capital, whereas you see academic services up to $1 million to try to get some textbooks in there. Otherwise, site budgets, transportation, IT, and district budgets are all relatively flat from the prior year. Okay. So the current approved student to teacher ratios. And as Gretchen was saying, we're at or below on average those ratios at every one of our schools. Is that accurate, Gretchen? Did I say that correctly?
Yes, I think the last email I sent out, the elementaries are pretty much right on track. The middle schools are below, as are the high schools.
Okay. And so here we kind of want to walk you through how we get to them, right? So we know that we're below these averages and we'd like to staff at the averages, but the way we handle that in some is that if we're riffing positions or collapsing classrooms, we only do that once a year when it comes to staffing. On the other side, when a need pops up for a teacher because of more students in the classroom, that's being monitored daily, weekly, if not daily. And the moment Gretchen has a highlighting system. And so when their students push that into a yellow, we all now have to start paying attention. There are a few students over the ratio. And then I think it's red. When it pushes them into red, they're enough over the ratio that we've all agreed this is when we add a teacher. And so that's being monitored, and a position is opened in real time and we hire as soon as possible. Whereas, like I said, the other side, when you're trying to reduce the surplus you have, you're doing it with open positions, maybe a few rifts, depending on discussions and staffing. I just want to show you that one goes quickly throughout the whole year, and one is in meetings once a year, well thought out, and very careful how we handle it. And so rather than reading this whole thing, if there's any discussion here, please bring it up. Through this, we have reduced staffing by more than 10 teacher positions going into next year. Okay.
And none of those were at the elementary. It's primarily the middle school and high school. The two middle schools were sitting at a 24-to-1 average across both campuses.
Wow.
There was some rearranging in special ed where program need moved. So it's not even necessary. It might be a reduction on one campus, but it might be an increase on another campus. So if the kiddos have moved out of a middle school program and there's no one backfilling that program, then Mrs. Trujillo and the principals worked to see where that need was and move them. So like Aaron said, it's a lot of work. We meet with all the stakeholders. We look at real time. We look at neighborhood growth. We look at projections. And even doing that, we've kept them all below average. So we're excited about that.
Very good.
I think the process works really good because for financially, the district we were able to reduce some budget there, but without it being affecting a school or a classroom in any sort of adverse way. And so the product we're getting for this thoughtful approach to our staffing has been quite impressive for me. Okay. Stipends, the age-old question. So we continue to work on equity here. I know that we had dreamed at a time that we would be able to create a comprehensive, equitable stipend plan across the entire district. That task is proving more difficult than we ever thought it was. And so we continue to just work at it. We look for areas where we believe they are out of whack. We rethink them because sometimes the stipends are out of whack with the work that we're asking for and out of whack with how much money they're being paid. So we pull it all in and we work through an individual stipend. We look for any types of complaints at meet and confer where people are feeling like it's unequitable. And it's important to know we meet and confer monthly. So it's an ongoing discussion. And so what I'm just trying to point out is that we continue to work toward the equitability, and it is absolutely important to us, but I can't provide you a list of every stipend and ensure that we'd have no issues across the entire district.
I can add, Mr. Sherman, one thing that we were very successful with this year, and I'm happy about it, was a major movement. Every school at every grade level, whether you're a department chair or a grade level chair, we standardized those stipends a year ago before the conversation. A couple of the elementaries, for example, their grade level chairs weren't receiving any stipend at all. To move over to a high school and a department chair was receiving a stipend. LST stipends were a little bit different across campuses. And so we 100% have standardized universal stipends. If you're a department chair, an LST chair, or some of those major positions that are happening across all campuses universally, they are all standardized. So it doesn't matter what school you're at, you're receiving the same stipend. And now, as Aaron just talked about, we're working through each school has their own individual activities that look different from school to school, and those are a little more difficult to standardize. So we're taking them in pockets through that meet and confer process, or just in isolation with the school to see if it's if there's chess on one campus but not on another. What does that look like, and what's the time and all of that. So we did make quite a bit movement, and I'm excited about that.
Thanks, Gretchen. That was much more eloquent than it was coming out for me, but exactly. And also, we've added stipends through ESSER, and those are very equitable. Like essentially every employee provided with the equal opportunities to attend X amount of hours of training and be compensated for. So we have, as we build new ones, that's always in our mind as well. And so I think we're able to build equitable stipends. It's just kind of getting to those individual items at different schools. Okay. So this came via the lawyers last time they reviewed it, but I think this could end up being a boon, potentially retention, recruitment type of technique. What we learned is that by law, we have to give people the right to choose how they want to be compensated for their contract, right? So a classified employee who works 9 months in a given year should have the option to take that over 12 months, right? Same with the teachers, the way they get a lump sum payment at the end of the year. They are supposed to have the right to make a decision that says, no, I want equal payments over my calendar rather than the lump sum payment. And so what this does is it gives each employee in our district the opportunity to tell us how they want to be paid over their contract. The one tricky thing for them is that once that starts on July 1, they can't go back. It's illegal, irrevocable at that point. And so we do know that sometimes our employees change their minds. And so we'll have to be really clear with them with the instructions with this, that their decision is set in stone, literally, once we actually move into the new year.
So it's similar to open enrollment. In a sense, when you sign up in the spring for your open enrollment, insurance decisions, that's it for the year. It's that same concept, correct?
Yeah, but the one thing with insurance is they have like 4 things that could happen, qualifying events that allow you to enroll. There's no qualifying events with this law. It is absolutely irrevocable.
Okay.
A little bit more strict, but yeah, exactly the same thing. Okay. Any questions about this area? Okay. Well, this is a final slide, conclusion. We maintained much of our flexibility, but asked for a year without discretionary raises to help with cash flow and the potential funding issues caused by the AEL fight. We'll honor all board-approved wage increases as well as minimum wage hike for all hourly staff in January. We expect not to pass on additional medical dental benefit costs to employees. We continue to prioritize equity in teacher to student ratios and our offerings of stipends. New contract options for employees may alleviate some of the financial struggles faced by our employees. And finally, we maintain our commitment to our strategic plan in all facets of the organization, especially during our budgeting process. That's the end of it.
Are there any questions or conversations that any board member would like to reopen at this time?
So the goal with this is we get conditional approval to move forward with our contracts, and then I bring this back to you as a real budget in the beginning of June.
And Mr. Jacks has a comment.
Okay.
My comment is, it's really hard not being able to get raises, especially in a year that we're seeing inflation go out of control. But it's also very important as a school district to be able to have a cash flow reserve and be able to stay solvent and in the black. And that sometimes those two just collide with one another, and it makes it a very difficult situation. But it's tough on employees when we can't give the raises, and I wished I had an answer to it.
We talk about that a lot too, President Jacks, where, if something significantly changes, from the vote in November or through the legislature or the money, we always have the option of coming back at any time and reissuing contracts. I think you had to do that a couple of times over your
Mhm.
tenure. And so while it's conditional approval, as Aaron just suggested, it doesn't mean the door is forever closed. It just means right now, yeah, as you pointed out, we have to be cautious, because if we promise something and then it goes into contracts and then the aggregate expenditure limit isn't reconciled, or it gets worse, that 301 possibility, then we can't pay our bills. It's hard when it collides, isn't it?
Mm.
But we paid our bills all the way through the end, and we were ready should it have not been passed. That was a very stressful couple of months, wasn't it?
I have a
Oh,
comment.
go ahead.
Aaron, can you talk again about the food services? And I think it was $750,000 that has to be spent or is being spent. I'm trying to find the slide, sorry. So the district has to spend an additional $750,000 due to the balance of the account.
Oh, man, have I been muted this whole time?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Nice.
I was talking. So, okay. The next week I will bring to you at the board meeting a finding related to not having too much money in that account at the end of the year. That finding is for $490,000. So that's cash in the food service account that cannot be applied to the current year that needs to be spent. And so that 490 is basically gone at this point, but at the same time, we're still earning revenue going into next year. And so I've targeted 750,000 to spend with by the time this month and a half, like mid-April, we should have all of that done so that we can reassess where that final number is going to be related to what I can carry over into the new year. It's all because of the federal government making it so we get reimbursement on essentially every meal. Chartwell's providing food choice, so kids are participating, or for whatever reason related to Chartwell's, more kids are participating, and we're getting all the revenue for that. So it's a brand new problem for our district that the year prior was only 40,000. Like it was 40,000 I needed to deal with at the end of the prior year, and that ballooned to 500, and we would expect it to continue to do so.
And there are rules on expenditures from that account, correct?
Yeah.
Review those rules briefly. Because everybody that's watching or in here is thinking, well, there's 750,000, let's spend it.
Well,
anything.
it's federal. It's either federal money or money we brought in from students paying, and it can only be spent on the food service program itself. And it's not like I could say, okay, let's go buy us a new fleet of food service cars. You have to be able to prove that it's repairing something or fixing something that you needed to fix to make operations better. And so that's what we're going after. We're going after things that need immediate fixing. And then, so we've prioritized things that were immediate this year. And then we have things for the next year and the year after that. Until they take that rule away, we can expect to have this excess cash in there to fund the infrastructure of our food service department.
Do we still have a student charge issue? Is there a deficit in payments that it could be applied to or anything like that?
No, the law with those student charges is the district must use a non-food service account to pay for those charges.
But like one example, how you could spend those funds would be if, let's say, a stage needed to be upgraded in one of the cafeterias, is that considered a food service expense since it's in the place where we serve food?
No, because we don't use that stage for serving food. It's not integral to like to that. If I guess if you had maybe potentially a roof issue over a cafeteria, you could argue that some of that could be paid by food service. But right now you want to think strictly in the kitchens and the cafeterias, like the actual things the students eat at. But I don't think a
So-
stage would fit.
And I'm not sure if you've reviewed this expenditure in a prior meeting, but one really good thing that some of that money is going toward would be new cafeteria tables. We haven't had new cafeteria tables in decades, and they're not safe for the folks who are taking them up and putting them down. They're heavy, they're awkward, and they have broken components. So all schools going into next year will have either repaired or replaced cafeteria tables.
Aaron, did you consider the $500 COVID stipend based on longevity of working with the district?
No, I haven't.
500 across the board for someone who's worked 2 years for the district versus someone who's worked 25 years, as an example?
No, I haven't done that. We just we did it flat last year, so I was considering it flat currently, but I could absolutely design a longevity based one using the same funds and then bring that. You guys would have to approve the expense when we get to that point regardless. So when we come to that point, I could bring you multiple options.
And the funds are about 500,000. Is that about what the stipend would cost?
I guess. Something like that. I couldn't say that right now without doing all the math. That's what we have it scheduled for. Let me get in there really quick. Do you want me to look that up?
No.
Okay.
And
I was just,
he uses the
Okay.
term at a minimum because we budgeted for 500, but if, as we've talked in Meet and Confer, if there are residual funds or funds that have been encumbered on the ESSER's grant but not spent, that would increase that. So it's at a base of 500, but it could, correct, Aaron? It could exceed that.
Yeah. We want to
What's left.
we want all the things we had planned for the year to come through as their actual costs. So then you would reassess how much you want to do on that stipend. And you could also, like, we have one budgeted for next year as well. We could say, let's move that away, put them all up into this first year. And with the thought we would be back to raises next year, and things like that. Like, that's what I mean when I could bring you multiple scenarios when we're closer.
okay, thanks.
Mhm.
Any other comments? Okay. If we have no other comments from any of the board members or anyone present, I guess we can move towards adjournment.
Yeah, there's no action. I just.
No?
Mr. Jacks, this is Mrs. Weiser.
Yes.
I just wanted to say that I really appreciate everything that our administration has done. This has been a real roller coaster, and all of our staff that are not going to be getting the raises next year, the way it looks, that we really appreciate what they've gone through. This is not an easy way to hopefully be ending our pandemic, but to hang in. We've been through worse in a lot of ways. So, thank you.
Excellent comment. Any other comments or? No? Okay, move towards adjournment,
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
and I'll
Second.
second it. We got a second. All those in favor, aye.
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 It carries. We are adjourned.